Wounded human soldier carries alien child through war zone. Mother demands life bond. The smoke hung heavy in the broken air, turning the sky into a gray curtain where no sunlight could break through. The ground was littered with shattered weapons, crushed helmets, and burned-out machines that had once been proud carriers of war. The battlefield was no longer alive with fire and thunder. It had gone silent. That silence carried a weight, heavier than the ruins themselves, and inside it moved one broken figure. A human soldier, his uniform torn and stained with dark blood, stumbled across the uneven earth. His left arm pressed tightly against his ribs where a deep wound refused to stop bleeding. His breathing was harsh, ragged, but he did not allow his legs to fail him. He was carrying something fragile in this wasteland of destruction. In his right arm, held close against his chest, was a small alien child. The child's skin was pale silver, its faintly glowing eyes closed in weakness, and its body trembling with every step the soldier took. It looked almost weightless, yet every movement sent sharp pain through the soldier's broken body. He kept moving. His boots sank into the mud, his blood mixing with the soil, and still he forced his legs to step forward. Around him, shadows of broken towers leaned against the wind. Once they had been homes. Once they had been walls filled with voices, families, and warmth. Now they were nothing but jagged teeth tearing at the horizon. The soldier did not look at them. His focus remained ahead. He had no map, no clear direction. He only knew he had to move. Somewhere behind him, far enough to be faint but near enough to keep his heart racing, came the sound of engines. Enemy patrol. He had survived too many battles to mistake that sound. The mechanical hum and the crackle of static voices meant they were searching. If they found him with the alien child in his arms, there would be no mercy. Neither for him, nor for the child. The soldier's vision blurred as exhaustion crept through him. He tasted iron in his mouth and felt his knees buckle. For a moment he almost let go, almost allowed the weight of pain to crush him into the ground. But then the child stirred. A soft sound, weak and broken, escaped its throat. The soldier tightened his grip and forced his body to move again. He remembered the moment he found the child. The war had torn across this land for weeks. Cities burned, fields turned into graves. He had been separated from his unit, left alone in a sea of enemies. He had taken cover in the ruins when he heard the cry. It was faint, like the sound of wind caught in broken glass. He followed it against all reason, and found the small alien lying under debris, barely alive. Logic told him to leave it. The alien species had been enemies to humanity for generations. Their weapons had burned human colonies, their fleets had destroyed human ships. Yet when he saw the small form reaching out with trembling fingers, something inside him refused to turn away. He had lifted the child, ignoring the sharp pain from his wound, and carried it out of the ruins. That one choice had led him here, bleeding, hunted and stumbling through the shadow of war. The soldier's ears caught the sound of a drone overhead. He froze, pressing his back against the broken wall of a collapsed building. He held the child close and lowered his head. The drone's red eyes scanned the wreckage, humming as it searched for life. He slowed his breathing, forced his body still, every muscle screaming for movement. For a moment it hovered above him. Then, with a mechanical click, it drifted away. The silence returned, heavier than before. He let out a slow breath and continued forward. His boots scraped against stone, his hand trembled as he steadied the child. Darkness had begun to creep across the horizon. Night would come soon, and with it the hunt would grow more dangerous. He needed shelter. He needed a place where he could tend to his wounds, and where the child would not slip away from life before morning. The soldier's thoughts flickered to his own people. Would they even understand what he was doing? Would they call him a traitor for saving an enemy child? Perhaps they would never forgive him. But here in the wasteland, no flag mattered, no command echoed. Only the small heartbeat against his chest gave him direction. The ground shook faintly. Distant explosions lit the far horizon with a dull glow. Another battle was raging somewhere else. The war had no end. It spread like fire, swallowing planet after planet. This world was just another victim. He wondered how many more children, human and alien alike, had cried in these ashes, waiting for someone to carry them to safety. His wound throbbed harder. He leaned against a broken wall, sliding down for a moment of rest. He looked at the child, whose breath came shallow and soft. He whispered words the child could not understand, but words that gave him strength. "Not here. Not today. You will not die here." His voice was weak, but his promise was strong. From the distance, lights flickered again. Patrols. Their shadows stretched long across the battlefield as machines moved closer. The soldier rose, his legs trembling, his vision spinning. He held the child tighter, pressed it against his chest, and began moving once more. Every step was fire. Every breath was a blade. But still he moved. The battlefield silence followed him like a ghost. It was not peace. It was the waiting silence before death decided to speak again. The wounded soldier reached the edge of the broken city when the last of his strength seemed ready to leave him. His boots dragged across uneven ground as night fell and the sky turned into a sea of dark ash. The small alien child stirred weakly in his arms, its faint glowing skin reflecting what little light remained. He had walked for hours, guided only by instinct and a desperate sense of duty, until the ruins gave way to a hidden valley where faint lights flickered in the shadows. He stumbled closer and saw them. Alien sentries stood among the shattered rocks, their tall frames tense, weapons raised the moment they caught sight of him. Their armor shimmered with faint energy lines, their eyes glowing like burning coals. The soldier froze, clutching the child against his chest. The aliens shouted in their language, sharp and filled with suspicion. But when they saw the child in his arms, their stance shifted. One of them stepped forward, lowering his weapon. His voice softened as he recognized the child. He spoke into a small device on his wrist, and the air was soon filled with the sound of hurried movement. More figures appeared, rushing from the shadows. At the center of them came a tall alien woman, her steps urgent, her breath uneven as if she had been running since the moment she heard. Her silver skin glowed brighter than the others, her long hair trailing behind like molten metal. Her eyes locked on the child, and she let out a cry that carried both fear and hope. The soldier felt her presence before she even reached him. She was the mother. She pushed past the guards, her hands trembling as she reached for the child. He hesitated, unwilling to let go until he was sure it was safe. For a moment their eyes met, human and alien, both filled with exhaustion and desperation. She took the child from his arms, pressing it against her chest, whispering words in a language he could not understand but could feel. The child stirred again, a faint sound leaving its lips, and the mother's tears flowed. But the relief did not last long. Her expression hardened as she turned back to him. She studied his blood-soaked uniform, his trembling hands, the human insignia that marked him as an enemy. Her tears dried into fury. She raised her voice, sharp and commanding, and the other aliens surrounded him instantly, weapons drawn and energy humming in the cold air. The soldier raised his hand slowly, too weak to resist, his breath shallow from pain. The mother stepped forward, still holding her child. Her voice carried the weight of old traditions, words carved into her people's blood for generations. She demanded something he could not understand, but her gestures were clear. She pointed to the child, then to him, and then pressed her hand against her own heart. The guards shouted in unison, repeating the word again and again. It was not an order for his death. It was something else, something deeper. Through broken translation, through fragments of words he had once heard from old soldiers, he understood. They demanded the life bond. The soldier's breath caught in his throat. He had heard whispers of this alien tradition, stories passed among humans in hushed tones. If an outsider saved the life of a child, the parent could demand a bond, a vow that tied their fates together forever. It was a ritual more powerful than law, more binding than any treaty. To accept meant to be one with their family, their clan, their destiny. To refuse meant dishonor, and dishonor could only be washed away with blood. He shook his head weakly, trying to explain that he had no strength, no intention, no ability to carry such a burden. He had saved the child because it was the right thing to do, not because he sought ties with an alien people. But the mother's eyes did not soften. Her grief had turned into fire, and she saw only one path forward. She raised her voice again, pressing the child close, demanding his answer. The guards moved closer, forcing him to his knees. Pain seared through his wound as his legs buckled. His vision swam, but he held his head high. He stared at the mother, at the child who now breathed more evenly in her arms. For a moment he thought of his own home, of the faces he would never see again. His people were far away, perhaps already mourning him as lost. Was he now to give himself fully to a world not his own? The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of alien energy weapons and the faint breathing of the child. Then the mother stepped forward. Placing her free hand on his chest where his wound bled, she spoke words that felt like a knife against his soul. Her demand was not for gratitude. It was for permanence. If he had saved her child, then he must accept the bond, share his life, his strength, his very future with them. The soldier closed his eyes. His body trembled from blood loss, his heart raced from fear. But in the darkness he saw the child again as he had first found it. Small, fragile, reaching out. He remembered the sound of its weak cry, the innocence that had pulled him through fire and pain. Could he truly walk away now when that same child looked at him with eyes that glowed faintly with life? He opened his eyes and met the mother's gaze. There was no escape. Not from her demand, not from the circle of warriors, not from the bond that had already begun the moment he lifted the child from the ruins. The night deepened. The valley lit only by alien lights as the wounded human soldier gave his answer. His voice was hoarse, weak, but steady. He accepted. The aliens let out a sound that echoed across the valley, half a chant, half a roar. The mother's eyes softened, though her tears did not stop. The bond had been spoken and fate had been sealed. The soldier felt the weight of it sink into his chest, heavier than his wound, heavier than the silence of the battlefield. He was no longer just a man lost in a war. He had become part of something larger, something dangerous, something binding. And in that moment he realized his struggle had only just begun. The firelight flickered across stone walls as the human soldier sat on the ground, his back pressed against a cold pillar carved long ago by alien hands. His body burned with fever, his wound still raw despite the rough bandages the alien healers had wrapped around him. Every breath was heavy, every movement sharp with pain, but the silence around him was heavier. He was deep inside the alien encampment, surrounded by guards who never lowered their weapons when looking at him. He was alive not because of mercy, but because of the bond. The child rested nearby, wrapped in silver cloth, breathing more steadily now. The mother sat beside the child, her eyes never leaving either of them. There was no gratitude in her stare, no warmth, only a silent reminder of the vow that had been forced upon him. She had demanded the bond and he had spoken the words of acceptance. He had not fully understood them, but the ritual itself had carved the meaning into his soul. The life bond was no ordinary tradition. He began to understand that as the hours passed, as whispers spread among the alien warriors. They spoke in their tongue, but fragments reached him. The bond was more than an oath. It was a chain woven by ancient belief, sealed not only by words but by blood. Once spoken, it could not be broken. If the child lived, he must protect it with his life. If the mother called, he must answer. If their clan suffered, he was bound to their survival. His own existence no longer belonged to him alone. The soldier's mind turned restless. He remembered his commanders, the human fleet scattered across the stars, the long war that had devoured countless lives. If they discovered what he had done, they would see him as lost, maybe even as a traitor. No human soldier could bind himself to the enemy without consequence. His loyalty had always been to his people, to the flag stitched into his blood. Yet here he was, chained by an alien tradition he had never asked for. The mother rose suddenly, her tall figure casting a sharp shadow against the fire. She approached him slowly, her expression a storm of grief and command. She placed her hand on his chest again, just as she had when demanding the bond, and spoke in her language. The words were low, but their meaning cut through the air. Through fragments and gestures, he understood what she told him. The bond was more than duty. It was connection. His life force had been tied to the child's. If the child perished, a piece of him would perish too. If the mother's clan fell into ruin, the weight of that ruin would drag him down with them. And in return, they would protect him even if their people hated his kind. His blood chilled. This was not a choice. It was a prison made of promises. He clenched his fists, his breath shaking. "I saved your child," he whispered, though she could not understand his words. That was enough. It should have been enough. But her eyes told him otherwise. To her, saving the child was only the beginning. The bond was the price he must pay. As the fire dimmed, the soldier's mind drifted back to the moment he first lifted the child from the ruins. He had thought of nothing then but survival, of saving a small, fragile life from the jaws of war. He had not thought of the future, of tradition, of consequence. He had acted because it felt right. And now that act had tied him to a fate he did not understand. Whispers filled the camp as more aliens arrived, warriors marked with scars, elders with glowing tattoos across their skin. They came to see the human who had spoken the bond. Some looked at him with suspicion, some with hatred, and a few with curiosity, but none dismissed the bond. They treated it as if the universe itself had carved it into stone. An elder stepped forward, his voice deep and heavy with years. He spoke slowly, his words translated by a younger alien who had learned fragments of the human tongue. The elder explained what the bond truly meant. It was not just for protection or survival. It was a merging of destinies. The human was no longer outside their clan. By saving the child, he had been chosen by the spirits of war and survival. He was now family. He was now blood. The soldier's heart tightened. Family. Blood. He had lost his own long ago. His comrades lay scattered on battlefields, his home a distant memory burned by war. To be told he belonged here among those who had been his enemies was a weight he did not know how to carry. But as he looked at the child, sleeping more peacefully now, he felt something stir inside him. It was not trust nor acceptance, but a small thread of understanding. He had carried this fragile life through fire and ruin. He had given it his strength when he had none left. Perhaps the bond had already been sealed in that moment long before the words were spoken. The mother watched him closely, her eyes filled with both fire and sorrow. She had demanded the bond not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. In her world, tradition was stronger than mercy. To her, the bond was not punishment, it was protection. It was the only way to ensure her child would live. The soldier leaned back against the pillar, his breath slow, his body trembling with fever. The secret of the life bond had been revealed, and it weighed on him like iron. He was no longer free, no longer just a wounded man trying to survive. He was part of something larger, something binding, something dangerous. And as the night deepened, he realized that the war outside these walls was no longer his only battle. The greater war had already begun inside his own soul. The first light of dawn crept across the valley, pale and weak, as if even the sun feared to rise over a world torn apart by war. The soldier sat against a wall of stone, his wound aching, his body heavy with exhaustion. He had not slept. His eyes had stayed half open, his ears catching every sound of footsteps and whispers in the alien camp. Around him the guards never left, their weapons always ready, their stares sharp. He was not trusted, not truly. He was only kept alive because of the bond. The mother stood nearby, holding her child, who now breathed easier, its small chest rising and falling with fragile steadiness. She whispered words into the child's ear, ancient prayers that carried through the still morning. But when her eyes lifted toward the soldier, they hardened again. There was no room for softness, not yet. The quiet was broken by the distant roar of engines. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder. The guards looked up at once, their bodies tense. The soldier knew that sound too well. Enemy patrols. The hunt had begun again. A horn echoed in the alien tongue, sharp and urgent. Warriors gathered, shouting orders, rushing to defend their camp. The elder appeared, his staff glowing faintly, his voice carrying command. He pointed to the human, then to the mother and the child. The words were clear enough to understand. They must leave. The bond meant the human could not be left behind, and the child could not remain here where death was closing in. The soldier tried to rise, his legs trembling, but he forced himself to stand. The mother approached, her hand firm on his arm, guiding him forward. For the first time, she touched him without anger, but not with trust either. It was necessity. They moved quickly, slipping through a narrow passage that led out of the camp and into the wasteland beyond. The war zone stretched before them like a nightmare that refused to end. Blackened trees, burned machines, the skeletons of cities, all lay silent except for the rumble of approaching forces. Drones moved across the skies, their red eyes sweeping the ruins, their engines buzzing like metal insects. The soldier gritted his teeth. If one of them caught sight of them, it would be over. The mother walked fast despite holding her child, her long strides forcing the wounded soldier to push himself harder. His body screamed at every step, but he refused to fall. The bond chained him to them now, but his own will drove him too.
He would not let the child die.
Not after carrying it this far. They moved between the ruins, shadows sliding along broken walls. The soldier scanned the horizon, his training whispering warnings at every corner. He signaled for the mother to stop at one point, holding her back as a patrol of armored vehicles passed across the open ground ahead. The ground shook under their heavy wheels, dust rising into the morning light. They waited, pressed against cold stone, until the last engine sound faded into distance. The child stirred, letting out a weak cry. The mother hushed it quickly, pressing her hand gently over its small mouth, her eyes filled with fear. The soldier looked at her, saw the tightness in her jaw, and for a moment he recognized something beyond the bond. It was the same fear he had once seen in the faces of his own people, when enemy fleets had descended from the skies. War had made enemies of their races, but fear was the same for both. They continued forward, deeper into the ruins. But the hunt pressed closer. Drones flew in wider circles now, their scanners buzzing against the walls. The soldier noticed the faint flicker of red light passing across the ground. He pulled the mother back into cover just as the beam swept over the space where they had stood. His heart pounded in his chest, sweat dripping down his face despite the cold air. The mother looked at him with sharp eyes, surprised at his instinct, his warning. For a brief second there was something new in her gaze, not warmth but recognition. She understood that his survival skills were keeping them alive. Hours passed as they moved through the wasteland, hunted on every side. The soldier's wound worsened, blood seeping again through the cloth wrapped around it. His steps grew heavier, his vision blurred, but he pushed forward. The mother noticed his weakness, though she said nothing. She carried her child closer to her heart and kept walking. But when his legs finally gave way, she stopped. She looked at him, then down at her child, and after a long silence, she reached out her free hand. He hesitated, but finally took it. She pulled him back to his feet, steadying his weight. They continued together, one step at a time. The sounds of the hunt grew louder. Shouts echoed in the distance, metal feet pounding against earth. The enemy knew they were near. The soldiers' training told him they would not stop until they were found. This was no patrol anymore. This was a full search. As the sun began to sink again, turning the ruins gold and red, they reached the edge of a collapsed bridge. Beneath it stretched a canyon filled with smoke and broken machines. It was their only path forward. The mother looked at the soldier, her eyes asking a question without words. Could he make it? He swallowed his pain and nodded. They crossed slowly, carefully, the bridge groaning under their weight. Halfway across, a drone appeared above, its red eye locking onto them. The soldier shouted, pushing the mother and child forward, raising his weapon despite his shaking arms. He fired, the shot cutting through the air and striking the drone's body. It spun, sparks flying before crashing into the canyon below. The noise echoed across the wasteland. The hunt had found them. The mother clutched her child, the soldier raised his weapon again, and together they began to run as shadows of enemy forces rose behind them. The war zone had swallowed them whole, and now it demanded the price of survival. The canyon walls glowed with the last fire of sunset as the soldier, the mother and the child ran across the broken land. Their shadows stretched long behind them, chased by the roar of machines and the echo of alien war cries. The soldier's lungs burned, every breath tearing through his chest, but he forced his legs forward. The mother kept close, holding the child tight as if her arms alone could shield it from the chaos closing in. Behind them, the enemy was no longer a faint sound but a storm. Drones flew low, their red eyes blazing in the dusk, and armored soldiers spread across the ruins, moving like hunters closing the circle. The soldier knew what it meant. There would be no escape unless they reached higher ground. The bond had chained him to this fight, and now it demanded everything he had left. They climbed over fallen stone, slipping through cracks where once roads had stood. The soldier's blood dripped down his side, leaving a trail behind him, but he did not slow. His weapon was nearly empty, only a few shots left. His strength was nearly gone, yet his will held. He glanced at the mother, saw the fear in her eyes, saw the silent determination in her jaw, and for a moment their breaths matched. Two enemies, bound by a choice neither of them had wanted, running together for one fragile life. The ground shook suddenly. A blast tore through the rocks ahead, sending dust and fire into the air. Enemy machines appeared on the ridge, their cannons glowing. The mother cried out, shielding her child as the soldier pulled her behind a wall of broken steel. The air screamed with heat as the blast struck again, pieces of stone flying like knives. The soldier pressed his back against the wall, his chest heaving. This was the end unless something changed. He turned to the mother, his eyes steady despite the blood on his face. "Run when I fire," he whispered. though he knew she did not understand his words. But the intent was clear in his eyes. He would stand, he would fight, and she would carry the child to safety. The mother shook her head, refusing. Her grip tightened on his arm, her eyes blazing.
She would not leave him.
Not now, not after the bond. The choice weighed heavy in the soldier's chest. Duty to his people had always been clear. Orders, commands, survival. These had guided him through every battle. But here on this broken world, nothing was clear anymore. His commanders were far away, his unit gone. Only the bond remained and the fragile heartbeat of the child that had tied his fate to theirs. The enemy closed in, their voices rising, their weapons aimed. The soldier raised his weapon, knowing his few shots would never be enough. But still he stood. The mother stepped beside him, holding the child close with one arm, raising a blade in her other hand. They stood together, two warriors from different worlds, surrounded by enemies who saw no difference between them. The battle erupted in fire and sound. The soldier fired until his weapon clicked empty, each shot striking with desperate precision. The mother's blade flashed in the fading light, her movements sharp and deadly. Yet for every enemy that fell, more appeared, their shadows filling the canyon, their machines shaking the earth. The soldier's knees buckled, his strength fading fast. He looked at the child, its glowing eyes open now, watching him with silent innocence. He felt the bond pulling at him, reminding him of the vow spoken in blood, to protect, to endure, to give all. His choice was clear. He pushed forward, shielding the mother and child with his own body, taking the fire meant for them. Pain tore through him, bright and endless, but he held his ground. He raised his empty weapon like a shield, his voice breaking into a raw cry as he stood against the storm. The mother's eyes widened, tears spilling as she realized what he was doing. She screamed words into the night, a cry of defiance, of grief, of unwilling acceptance. The enemies paused, their weapons ready, their formation tightening. The soldier swayed, blood running freely now, his strength nearly gone. Yet he did not fall. His choice had been made. He would stand until his last breath, bound not by command or by flag, but by the bond and by the fragile life he had carried through fire. The mother stepped forward suddenly. Her blade raised high, her voice ringing across the battlefield. She spoke in her language, sharp and commanding, her words filled with power. The enemies hesitated, their movements slowing, their formation uncertain. Her clan's warriors appeared then from the shadows, answering her call. They rushed into the canyon, weapons blazing, turning the tide. The soldier fell to one knee, his vision dim, but relief flickered across his face. The mother stood over him, her blade dripping with light, her child pressed against her chest. Her clan fought with fury, driving back the hunters, filling the canyon with fire and cries. The battle raged on, but the soldier could no longer lift his weapon. He leaned against the stone, his breath shallow, his eyes fixed on the mother and child. He had made his final choice, and it had bound him to something larger than himself. As the night fell heavy and the enemy retreated, the mother knelt beside him. Her hand pressed against his chest, her eyes filled with tears and fire. She whispered words he did not understand, but the meaning was clear. He had honored the bond. He had chosen them. And though darkness threatened to close around him, he felt a strange peace. He was no longer alone. He was part of something, bound forever by the final choice he had made.